Okay, here we are in our development environment, and what we want to do is take a look at the open source Apache licensed sample extension service directory. I've already set this up in my development environment, and we can see here in the sample extension service directory Apache DS folder, I have an embedded LDAP directory service. Now it's worth pointing out here that the intention is not to try to teach somebody how to use the embedded LDAP directory service from Apache. Our focus here is more on what to write in the code to create a powerful directory service extension. If we take a look at this class, we can see it's actually quite large because of the fact that there's a lot of work to do inside of a directory service. So the first thing is we can see that we have extended our abstract service and we've implemented our directory service. These were two of the key features in the checklist that we just reviewed inside of our curriculum. Our constructor event passes in a static UUID and a human readable name assigned to this directory service extension. And then we implement our key methods of the directory service itself. So if we take a look at IDirectoryService, it's very well Java docked. It extends iService, iHealth checkable, and managed. And we have a number of different operations that we have to perform. We have to be able to create the directory itself, since this is a directory service. All users are explicitly associated with this directory based on their email address, and that is a key feature that must continue to exist even in your custom directory services. Our directory service will require the ability to create a user, as well as to look up the role of a particular user based on the iUser interface. Now, as was discussed in the course curriculum earlier, the iUser interface is very minimal. It only includes fields for a first name, a last name, the email address, and the role type of that user. The purpose of the iUser interface is to keep it simple within the object's server's core itself. So when we create a user and when we look up a user, the directory service extension will not have an elaborate set of properties that have to be mapped or managed. That's beyond the scope of the directory service as implemented by the Smart Cosmos Objects server. We also need to support the ability to reset a password or allow the user to reset the password themselves if that is decided to be made available inside of your application. Again, one of these two or both of these methods should be supported. In the event that a password is being reset via an email, it's most likely going to use a one-time use token, in which case we have a set password method that focuses and will only work if this reset token actually matches what was generated in the send password reset email. We need the ability to see if a user is enabled or not. It is possible to disable a user account, and a disabled user account is not authorized to log in to any of the services on the server. Also, this is the most important method, the authenticated method. If we are to authenticate a user, we need to pass in credentials. Now, the iCredentials that are being passed in is a marker interface. This creates a separation of concerns between the directory service and the actual core implementation of the server itself. When the iCredentials is passed in, you have the ability to then cast that appropriately. In the case of our sample embedded LDAP directory service, if we take a look at the authenticate method, we can actually see that we get our generic credentials, and we're actually checking to see if they're an instance of the Dropwizard basic credentials. If they are an instance, great, we can move forward and we can actually cast our generic credentials back into the Dropwizard basic credentials that came from the platform. Once we're in the correct interface, we can format our UID according to the directory service that we're providing. In this case, with Apache, we have our UID our DC and our DC, mapping to the username or their email address, the second level domain, and the top level domain. We then connect to our directory service, and again, most of this is boilerplate code for most LDAP servers, and our intention is not to cover how to code an LDAP server here. But suffice to say, we create this directory context, and if we get here, we know that our authentication by the LDAP server has passed, so now we need to check to see if the account is actually enabled. So we do that by looking up the user account in the system. We grab their role. We check to see first and foremost if they're enabled. We take that enabled check, and if their account is disabled, we send a security exception. And this is actually the exception type that needs to be thrown out of the directory service if for any reason the authentication fails. You'll also notice that in the case of the embedded LDAP directory service from Apache, we are throwing an unsupported operation exception because we're not going to support the OAuth 2.0 token exchange in this version of the sample code. Because we are implementing and extending the iHealth checkable, we actually have the ability to report back to the administrative monitoring page that yes, the directory server is up and running and it's actually healthy. We're managed, which means as a managed service, we have a start and a stop method available to us. In the start method, you can see that we actually will make sure that the extension, Apache DS Server extension, has been installed and configured. If that extension, that server extension, is not installed, then this directory service plugin doesn't make any sense, and it throws an illegal state exception. Here we also see a powerful example of how a server extension can provide key functionality, and a service extension can look up that extension to verify that it's installed and operating properly before it actually goes through and starts and makes any exceptions or creates an unstable platform. Once the start method completes, we actually will create the directory context in the server as necessary. And then finally in the cleanup, we actually will close that directory context. So as we can see through this sample code, there's a lot that actually goes into planning and building a directory service.